Before I share anything else, place your hand on your chest and take a deep breath. Feel that? That's your body already responding to what's about to happen. The subtle acceleration of your heartbeat, that slight constriction in your throat, that's not random. That's your shadow already activating in anticipation of exposure. Most videos ease you in with gentle introductions. Not this one. We're beginning with immediate embodiment because shadow work happens in your body, not your intellect. If you're here because you genuinely want to learn how to do shadow work yourself, I see you. I see the pain that brought you here, that persistent feeling that something fundamental remains unresolved despite your best efforts. I recognize the courage it takes to face your shadow instead of just reading about it. Many of us arrive at shadow work after years of trying other approaches that never quite reach the core. We've done the therapy, read the books, watched the videos, yet that sense of being caught in the same patterns remains. That frustration isn't failure, it's wisdom. Your system knows when something deeper is needed. The challenge isn't knowledge, it's integration. Most approaches to shadow work focus almost exclusively on understanding, leaving you with insights that never translate into lived change. This creates a painful gap between what you know and how you live. What makes shadow work different from conventional self-development is that it doesn't just address the content of your thoughts, it transforms the context from which those thoughts emerge. It's not about adding more knowledge. It's about changing your relationship to what you already know. Let's try something now. Bring to mind a recent moment that triggered you, something sharp, something fresh. As it rises, don't ask why it happened. Ask, who's observing this feeling? That shift, subtle but surgical, moves you from being the pattern to witnessing it. That's context shifting. This subtle shift moves you from content to context, from being trapped in a pattern to witnessing the pattern itself. That's where shadow work begins. The most sophisticated defense mechanism isn't denial, it's intellectual understanding without embodiment. Understanding without embodiment deepens the shadow. But what does that really cost you? 1. First, it creates dissonance. You see the pattern, but keep repeating it. You think awareness should equal change, but it doesn't. 2. Then it starts to hurt emotionally. That repeated failure becomes internalized as proof that something in you is fundamentally broken. 3. Next, it crystallizes into identity. Now you're the one who's doing the work, but the work becomes performance. The identity depends on the problem's surviving. 4. Now it leaks into behavior. You ritualize self-awareness without transformation. Books, practices, reflections, all orbiting the same frozen core. 5. And finally, you decorate the cage. You mistake insight for freedom. You call it healing. But really, you've made peace with your pattern staying. Understanding shadow patterns intellectually doesn't change them. You can master the theory while your life remains unchanged. The insights accumulate in your mind, creating an impressive structure of psychological knowledge that you mistake for transformation, while your relationships continue in the same patterns. Your emotional reactions remain predictable. Your suffering persists because knowledge without embodiment is merely sophisticated defense. Your explanations protect the very patterns they describe. Let's be honest about what's at stake. Shadow work isn't just another self-improvement project. It's a fundamental restructuring of how you relate to yourself. It requires moving beyond the comfortable position of the observer and into direct contact with aspects of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding. But there is a liberation that emerges through this confrontation, not the liberation of transcending your problems, but of fully inhabiting them, the kind of freedom that comes not from rising above your humanity, but from descending fully into it with awareness, compassion, and unwavering presence. I'll guide you through specific techniques in each section of this video, practices you can implement today. Some will feel challenging. That's intentional. The path through your shadow isn't meant to be comfortable, but it does lead to genuine peace. Not the peace of perfect resolution, but the deeper peace of no longer being at war with yourself. Are you ready to begin this work for real? Not just to understand it, but to embody it? Let's start with the first commitment practice. Every concept you understand about the shadow without applying becomes another veil concealing what you need to see about yourself. Knowledge without action strengthens resistance. You're either here to change or here to pretend you're changing. Which is it? Let's find out together. Pattern identification. The first shadow work technique we'll practice is called pattern identification. This method bypasses your intellectual defenses by accessing your body's wisdom directly. Don't worry if you've tried similar exercises before. The difference is in how we'll approach the information that emerges. Take a moment to find a pen and paper. I'll wait. Now, before you write anything, I want you to close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths, allowing your awareness to settle into your body. Notice any areas of tension or constriction. From this embodied awareness, write this sentence: STEM. The pattern I recreate in my life that causes me suffering, that I am actively choosing to maintain, is. Complete it with whatever arises naturally, without censorship or analysis. What you've just written likely touches something vulnerable within you. I honor the courage it takes to acknowledge this pattern. Many of us have spent years developing sophisticated explanations for why we remain stuck: our childhood, our trauma, our circumstances. These explanations aren't wrong, but they often function as beautiful barriers to change. Let me guide you through 3 levels of working with what you've written. First level: intellectual understanding. Read what you wrote and notice your mind's immediate response. It will likely try to explain, justify, or analyze the pattern. This is normal but limited. Second level: emotional recognition. Place one hand on your heart and ask yourself, how does maintaining this pattern protect me? Notice what emotions arise: fear, safety, familiarity. This emotional layer often reveals why the pattern persists despite your conscious desire to change it. Third level: somatic awareness. Scan your body and notice where you physically feel this pattern. Is there tightness in your chest, constriction in your throat, heaviness in your stomach? This bodily awareness is your direct access point to the pattern itself. True shadow integration begins with recognizing that your patterns aren't failures or obstacles. They're adaptations that once served you. Understanding without embodiment creates sophisticated defenses. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of shadow work is that change happens not through rejection of these patterns, but through compassionate engagement with them. Your patterns serve a protective function. They persist because they're solving a problem you haven't consciously recognized. Each time you try to force change without acknowledging the protective purpose, your system naturally resists, creating an internal conflict that drains your energy, maintains the status quo, and deepens your frustration, because genuine transformation requires working with your system rather than against it. Your resistance contains the key to your release. True shadow integration begins with recognizing that your patterns aren't failures or obstacles. They're adaptations that once served you. They're parts of you attempting to meet legitimate needs in ways that may no longer serve your adult life. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of shadow work is that change happens not through rejection of these patterns, but through compassionate engagement with them. When you turn toward what you've been fighting against with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, the pattern begins to reveal its origins and purpose. This isn't abstract theory. It's a practical approach to working with your psyche rather than against it. The pattern you identified today will be our foundation for the deeper work to come. Keep that paper with you as we continue. Now, as we move forward, notice the subtle but crucial difference between understanding your pattern and actually experiencing it in your body. This distinction is where genuine shadow work becomes possible. Mapping the pattern you identified in the previous exercise reveals something crucial about how your shadow operates. What you wrote touches something raw. But we're not done. Let's trace how this pattern protects you, not just from pain, but from parts of yourself you've never named. This process is called vulnerability mapping. And it's not about wounds. It's about the strategies your wounds have built. Most approaches define the shadow as what you repress or deny, the qualities you can't accept in yourself. While this isn't wrong, it's incomplete. The more transformative understanding is that your shadow equally operates through your most cherished self-concepts, your intelligence, spiritual awareness, psychological sophistication, even your identity as someone doing shadow work. This paradox is challenging but liberating. What you most strongly identify with often contains your most powerful shadow material. Let me explain why this matters practically. When we identify shadow only as what we reject, we create a false dichotomy. Shadow becomes the bad stuff, while consciousness becomes the good stuff. This misses how shadow operates in far more sophisticated ways. Your most developed qualities become the perfect hiding places for shadow material precisely because you don't think to look there. Let's practice vulnerability mapping with 3 common shadow manifestations. As I describe each one, notice which creates the strongest physical or emotional response in you. That's valuable information about your particular shadow pattern. First manifestation, the conceptual collector. This aspect uses intellectual understanding as a substitute for embodied change. The shadow doesn't manifest as ignorance, but as sophisticated knowledge that never translates to lived experience. Try this. Think of a psychological concept you understand well. Now ask yourself, how has understanding this concept changed my actual behavior and relationships? Notice any gap between knowledge and application. This gap is where shadow thrives. Second manifestation, the process performer. This aspect creates the appearance of growth through ritualized self-development activities. The shadow operates not through resistance to growth, but through an identity built around doing the work that subtly prevents completion. Try this. Consider a personal growth area you've been working on for years. Ask yourself, what would I lose if I fully resolved this issue? Notice any attachment to the journey itself. This attachment often reveals how shadow maintains certain struggles. Third manifestation, the transcendence. Bypasser. This aspect uses spiritual or psychological awareness to float above the messier aspects of human experience. The shadow operates through premature integration rather than authentic embodiment. Try this. Recall a recent emotional trigger. Notice how quickly you move to explain, contextualize, or transcend the emotion rather than fully experiencing it. This speed often reveals shadow's operation through spiritual sophistication. Your most developed qualities create sophisticated hiding places. Shadow thrives in what you understand but don't embody. The areas where you feel most conscious often contain unconscious material. Your psychological knowledge becomes not just a tool for growth, but simultaneously a defense against it. Your spiritual awareness functions not only as expanded consciousness, but also as subtle avoidance. Your very commitment to shadow work can become the perfect strategy for maintaining shadow through the illusion of addressing it. Your light doesn't eliminate your shadow, it casts it. This understanding isn't meant to discourage you, but to refine your approach. True shadow integration requires looking not just at what you reject, but at what you embrace, not just at your weaknesses, but at your strengths. The practical application is profound. Each time you feel certainty about an aspect of yourself, pause and ask, what might be hiding in the shadow of this certainty? This question initiates a different kind of awareness, one that doesn't reinforce your existing self-concept, but gently reveals what it might be obscuring. Now take a moment to identify which of the 3 manifestations resonated most strongly with you. This is your dominant shadow strategy. Not a flaw to eliminate, but a pattern to befriend with awareness. Understanding your particular strategy provides a precise access point for deeper integration work. In the next section, we'll explore how to work directly with this strategy through a technique called shadow dialogue that transforms your relationship with these patterns at their root. You've named the pattern. You've seen how it hides. Now we give it a voice, not to fight it, but to hear what it's been trying to protect all along. This practice is called shadow dialogue, and it changes everything. This approach draws from parts work therapy, but with a crucial difference that makes it especially effective for shadow integration. I call this the Machiavellian framework, not because it's manipulative, but because it acknowledges a truth many therapeutic approaches avoid. The shadow operates with intelligence and strategy. It's not a collection of repressed material waiting passively to be discovered. It's an active architect of your life patterns. This perspective shift is profound. When you recognize your shadow as strategic rather than chaotic, you can engage with it differently, not as something to overcome, but as a sophisticated aspect of yourself with its own agenda and wisdom. Let me share why many conventional therapeutic approaches struggle with shadow work. Most therapy operates from the assumption that bringing unconscious material into consciousness is sufficient for transformation. But with shadow material, awareness alone often strengthens rather than dissolves the pattern. Here's why. Your shadow doesn't just contain what you can't face, it contains what has been strategically hidden to maintain your functioning and identity. Shadow transforms awareness into another form of avoidance. When you approach it as something to fix or transcend, you activate its defensive strategies. The shadow dialogue technique bypasses this defense by approaching your shadow pattern with curiosity rather than agenda, meeting it as an intelligent part of yourself rather than a problem to solve. Here's how to practice shadow dialogue. First, create physical space for the dialogue. Place 2 chairs facing each other, or designate 2 distinct positions if you're sitting or standing. Second, identify the specific shadow pattern you'll dialogue with, the one that resonated most strongly from the previous section. Third, physically move to the position representing your conscious self. Formulate one clear, non-judgmental question to ask this shadow aspect. For example, what are you trying to protect me from? Fourth, physically move to the position representing your shadow aspect. Allow yourself to respond from this perspective without censorship or analysis. Notice any shifts in your posture, tone, or emotional state. Fifth, continue this dialogue, moving physically between positions until you reach a moment of genuine insight or surprise, something your conscious mind wouldn't have formulated on its own. Your shadow contains not just problems, but solutions. It operates strategically to maintain stability in your psyche. The very patterns you're trying to change were originally created as adaptive responses to genuine threats, protecting vital aspects of your functioning, maintaining psychological stability, ensuring survival in circumstances where other options appeared unavailable, because your shadow doesn't create suffering randomly, but purposefully as a protection against what it perceives as greater threats. Your shadow's resistance contains its wisdom. This approach fundamentally differs from conventional therapy in that it doesn't pathologize or seek to eliminate shadow aspects. Instead, it creates a relationship with them, acknowledging their protective function while negotiating new, more conscious ways to meet their underlying concerns. When practiced regularly, shadow dialogue reveals something remarkable. Your shadow patterns are often misguided attempts to meet legitimate needs. The pattern itself may be problematic, but the underlying concern is valid and deserves attention. Most people make the mistake of trying to eliminate shadow patterns through force of will or spiritual bypassing. This approach doesn't eliminate the shadow, it drives it deeper. Shadow dialogue creates transformation not through conquest, but through relationship. Try this abbreviated version right now. Close your eyes, take a breath, and internally ask your primary shadow pattern. What are you trying to protect me from? Notice the response that arises without judgment. This simple exchange begins to shift your relationship with the very pattern you've been fighting. In our next section, we'll take this dialogue deeper with a more targeted exercise that addresses your specific identified pattern. What you resist in others often reflects what you've disowned in yourself. Let's use that mirror. When you start reclaiming what you've projected, something strange happens. Clarity. This is called projection reclamation. It's the cleanest mirror your shadow has ever given you. This exercise works directly with how your unconscious mind projects shadow material onto external situations, particularly in areas where you feel strong emotional charge. The insight driving this technique comes from Jung's observation that what affects us most strongly in others reveals what we've disowned in ourselves. Not everything that triggers us is projection, but our most intense reactions often contain vital information about our shadow. Take a moment to find your paper again. Now write this question. When others see my interest in psychology and shadow work, what might they recognize about me that I'm not fully acknowledging? Answer without analyzing or filtering. Write whatever arises naturally, even if it seems uncomfortable or doesn't make immediate sense. This question operates on multiple levels. First, it uses the psychological principle that we can sometimes see through others' eyes more honestly than through our own. Second, it bypasses your conscious defenses by framing the inquiry through outside perspective. Third, it targets the specific area where shadow often hides, in our most cherished identities and pursuits. Now take what you've written and follow this 3-step projection reclamation process. Step 1, locate the feeling in your body. Close your eyes and read what you wrote. Notice where in your body you feel a response. Is there tightness in your chest, contraction in your stomach, tension in your shoulders? Place your hand on this area with gentleness. Step 2, acknowledge the projection. Say to yourself, this quality I'm seeing is a part of me I haven't fully acknowledged. Notice any resistance to this statement. Resistance often indicates you're touching something significant. Step 3, reclaim the projection. Ask yourself, how might my life be different if I consciously integrated this quality? Imagine embodying this aspect of yourself in a healthy, conscious way. What would change in your relationships, your work, your inner experience? What triggers you contains information about yourself. You become what you understand but don't integrate. Your strongest emotional reactions reveal disowned aspects of your psyche. The qualities that provoke your judgment, fascination, or aversion in others often represent aspects of yourself seeking recognition, integration, and expression as your unconscious mind uses the external world as a mirror, reflecting back precisely what you most need to acknowledge within yourself. Because projection serves not just as a defense, but as a pathway toward wholeness. Your triggers are invitations to reclamation. This practice differs fundamentally from conventional shadow exercises in that it doesn't ask you to fight against projections or force yourself to change. Instead, it treats projection as a natural process with profound wisdom and purpose. A way your psyche communicates what's ready for integration. Many people misunderstand projection as something negative to eliminate. In reality, projection is one of the most valuable tools your unconscious mind uses to bring shadow material into awareness. The key is learning to decode its messages rather than getting caught in its drama. When practiced regularly, projection reclamation creates a profound shift in how you relate to triggering situations and people. Instead of reacting from unconscious patterns, you begin to see each trigger as valuable information about your own inner landscape, an opportunity for integration rather than a problem to solve. Try applying this technique to a relationship that currently creates strong emotional reactions for you. Notice how your perspective shifts when you approach the situation as a projection revealing something about yourself rather than just a problem with the other person. In our next section, we'll build on this awareness with a technique for translating these insights into change behavior patterns, moving from recognition to embodied transformation. Knowing your pattern isn't enough. You need to stop it mid-movement in real time. That moment, the microsecond of choice, That's where the rewiring begins. We call that pattern interruption, and it's how knowing becomes becoming. While most shadow work stops at recognition, true integration requires disrupting the automated patterns that maintain shadow material in daily life. All transformation happens in embodiment, not understanding. You've likely noticed a particular challenge by now. There's often a gap between recognizing a pattern and actually changing it. You've likely noticed a particular challenge by now. There's often a gap between recognizing a pattern and actually changing it. This happens because shadow patterns operate largely through automaticity. They run below conscious awareness through established neural pathways. Recognition alone rarely changes these pathways. Pattern interruption works directly with your nervous system in moments when shadow patterns are active. Instead of trying to think your way out of patterns, you learn to physically disrupt them in real time, creating space for new responses to emerge. Here's how to practice this technique in your daily life. First, pattern identification. From your previous exercises, select one specific shadow pattern you want to work with. For example, I intellectualize emotions to avoid feeling them, or I perform personal growth without actually changing. Second, trigger awareness. Identify the specific situations, sensations, or interactions that typically activate this pattern. Be precise, not just when I'm stressed, but when someone questions my expertise, or when I feel vulnerable in relationships. Third, physical anchor. Create a physical gesture that you can use to interrupt the pattern when you notice it arising. This could be placing your hand on your heart, touching your thumb and forefinger together, or taking a deliberate breath. The specific gesture doesn't matter as much as your consistent use of it. Fourth, pattern interruption. When you notice the pattern activating in daily life, immediately use your physical anchor. This creates a momentary pause in the automatic sequence, a critical moment of choice where new possibilities can emerge. Fifth, alternate response. After interrupting the pattern, consciously choose a different response. This doesn't need to be perfect. Even a small variation breaks the automaticity and begins establishing new neural pathways. Let's practice a simplified version right now. Think of a shadow pattern you've identified. Now imagine a situation where this pattern typically activates. As you feel the familiar impulse of the pattern, place your hand on your heart or use another physical gesture to create an interruption. In that pause, imagine responding differently than you typically would. Recognition alone rarely creates behavioral change. Shadow patterns persist through neural automaticity despite intellectual awareness. Your conscious mind can understand the pattern perfectly while your nervous system continues executing it, automatically creating the frustrating experience of knowing better. Yet doing the same as awareness and behavior operate on different levels, requiring different interventions. Because lasting transformation happens not through insight alone, but through disrupting established neural pathways and creating new ones through repeated practice. Your body transforms what your mind only recognizes. This technique reveals a counterintuitive truth about shadow work. Transformation often begins not with grand insights, but with tiny disruptions to automatic patterns. These small moments of interruption gradually create new possibilities for response that weren't available before. What makes pattern interruption especially effective is that it works with your nervous system rather than against it. Instead of fighting established patterns through willpower, which rarely succeeds long-term, you create space for new patterns to emerge organically through consistent interruption of the old. The clinical research on habit formation supports this approach. Sustainable change happens not through forcing new behaviors, but through disrupting the automaticity of established ones, creating space where different choices become possible. Try applying this technique to one shadow pattern this week. You'll likely notice something fascinating. The mere act of interrupting the pattern begins to change your relationship with it, even before you've fully established a new response. The interruption itself is transformative. In our next section, we'll explore how to work with the most challenging aspect of shadow integration, the identity-level resistance that emerges when old patterns begin to change. Every shadow needs a story to survive, and often that story sounds like, "This is just who I am." But what if that identity isn't truth? It's habit. This practice is called identity restructuring. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming someone true. This practice works directly with the core narratives that maintain shadow patterns at the deepest level of the psyche. Our previous techniques address patterns at the levels of awareness, projection, and behavior. Identity restructuring works at the foundational level, the stories you maintain about who you are, which often unconsciously preserve shadow material despite your best efforts to change. The insight driving this approach comes from narrative psychology. Your identity isn't a fixed reality, but a story you maintain through selective attention, interpretation, and memory. This story becomes so familiar that it seems like objective truth rather than a construction that can be revised. Take your paper one more time. Write this sentence. The story about myself that I would have to abandon if I actually integrated my shadow fully is. Complete this with whatever arises naturally. Don't censor or analyze. What you've written likely touches something fundamental about how you understand yourself. These core narratives are the most difficult aspects of shadow to integrate precisely because they're not experienced as beliefs or patterns, but as basic truths about reality. Notice any physical sensations that arise as you speak. Tension, release, constriction, or expansion. Here's how to work with what you've just uncovered using the identity restructuring technique. First, story recognition. Acknowledge that what you've identified is a story, not an immutable truth. This isn't about denying its emotional power, but recognizing its constructed nature. Second, function identification. Ask yourself, how has this story served me? What has it protected me from? Honor its protective function rather than judging it as a failure or weakness. Third, alternative narratives. Begin exploring alternative stories that could equally explain your experiences while allowing for new possibilities. Not forcing a positive narrative, but finding one with more flexibility. Fourth, gradual embodiment. Practice speaking and acting from this alternative narrative in small, safe contexts. Notice resistance. It shows you're touching something significant. Your identity is a narrative, not a fixed reality. Changing core narratives creates space for shadow integration. The stories you tell about yourself become the boundaries of what's possible as they shape your perception, filter your experiences, and organize your memories into a coherent but limited self-concept that feels objective while actually being a creative construction maintained through habitual attention and interpretation, because your psyche requires narrative coherence even at the cost of growth and authenticity. Your freedom lies in narrative flexibility, not narrative truth. This approach differs fundamentally from positive affirmations or cognitive reframing. It doesn't ask you to replace a negative story with a positive one, but to recognize the constructed nature of all identity narratives, creating flexibility where rigid storylines once dominated. Many spiritual traditions point to this same insight, what Buddhists call no self, what contemplative Christians call dying to self. The psychological process of identity restructuring creates practical access to this profound spiritual understanding. The most powerful shadow integration happens not through better understanding your current identity, but through recognizing that you are the awareness in which identities arise, not the identities themselves. This creates the possibility of conscious relationship with shadow material, rather than unconscious identification with it. In our daily practice, identity restructuring involves regularly questioning your most certain self-narratives. Is this who I am, or is this a story I maintain? This questioning gradually loosens the grip of rigid identity structures, allowing shadow material to integrate rather than remain split off and projected. In our final section, we'll explore how to maintain these practices in daily life through a sustainable implementation approach that turns shadow work from isolated exercises into a continuous, lifelong practice. You've touched the pattern, spoken to the shadow, stepped through identity. But what happens when the practice ends? What happens when you're back in your life and the old rhythm starts to return? This is where most people slip. Not because they're weak, but because they've been taught that integration is linear. Do the exercise, get the insight, feel the shift, be healed. But shadow work doesn't work that way. It never has. Real integration isn't a finish line. It's a rhythm, a way of seeing that deepens as you live. This rhythm has a name. I call it Paradoxical Awareness, a worldview that doesn't fight your shadow but moves with it. Let's explore how to live from that place, not just sometimes but continuously. The most common obstacle to lasting shadow integration isn't lack of technique, but a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of the work itself. Many approach shadow work as a linear process with a clear endpoint. First, you identify shadow material, then you integrate it, then you're healed. This linear model inevitably creates frustration. Paradoxical awareness offers a different framework based on 3 counterintuitive principles that transform how you approach shadow material in daily life. First principle, integration through relationship, not elimination. The goal of shadow work isn't to eliminate shadow material, but to develop a conscious relationship with it. This profound shift moves you from fighting against parts of yourself to engaging with them as valuable aspects of your psyche with their own intelligence and purpose. Try this practice. When shadow material arises, rather than asking, "How do I get rid of this?" ask, "What relationship am I developing with this aspect of myself?" Notice how this question transforms your orientation from combat to conversation. Second principle, competence through cycles, not completion. Shadow work isn't a linear journey, but a spiral one, where you revisit similar themes at deeper levels throughout life. Success isn't measured by permanent resolution, but by increased competence in moving through these cycles with greater awareness and less identification. Try this practice. When you notice a familiar pattern recurring, rather than seeing it as failure, welcome it as an opportunity for deeper integration. Ask, what new aspect of this pattern am I ready to see now that wasn't accessible before? Third principle, wholeness through inclusion, not transcendence. Psychological and spiritual maturity comes not from transcending shadow material, but from including more of your human experience within your field of compassionate awareness. The highest states aren't above your humanity, but fully within it. Try this practice. When you notice yourself trying to rise above or transcend difficult emotions or patterns, intentionally turn toward them instead. Ask, what would it mean to include this experience rather than transcend it? Shadow work is relationship, not elimination. Integration happens through engagement, not victory. The very effort to overcome defeat or eliminate shadow material reinforces the split in your psyche that created the shadow in the first place, maintaining the fundamental division between acceptable and unacceptable aspects, perpetuating the cycle of projection and denial. Because true integration requires not conquest, but conversation with the disowned aspects of yourself. Revelation. Your shadow becomes your ally through relationship, not your trophy through conquest. These principles challenge the dominant paradigm in both psychology and spirituality, which often frames growth as a battle against unwanted aspects of self. This combative approach doesn't integrate shadow. It reinforces the very splits that created it. The practical application of paradoxical awareness involves daily inner dialogue. Establish a regular practice of dialogue with shadow aspects, similar to the techniques we've explored, but briefer and more frequent. 5 minutes daily creates more integration than hours of occasional work. Projection. As practice, use your projections, positive and negative, onto others as continual opportunities for self-discovery. When strongly triggered, ask, what am I seeing in them that I'm not acknowledging in myself? Resistance. As guide, Let your resistance to certain practices, ideas, or people become your most valuable teacher. The areas where you feel strongest resistance often contain the most significant growth opportunities. Identity. As context, practice holding your identity narratives more lightly, seeing them as useful constructions rather than fixed realities. This creates space for shadow material to integrate rather than threaten your sense of self. In our final section, we'll explore how to maintain these practices through inevitable cycles of engagement and forgetting, creating a sustainable approach to shadow work that evolves with you throughout your life. Integration doesn't unfold in a straight line. It breathes. There will be times when the work flows effortlessly, and times when it disappears into the background of your life. That's not failure. That's the rhythm of real transformation. Most people begin shadow work in a burst of clarity. Then life resumes. The job, the relationship, the distractions. The inspiration fades. But the ones who sustain it, they don't push harder. They learn to move with the cycle. I call this cyclical integration, the art of honoring the seasons of your inner work. Action and rest, insight and digestion, discipline and drift. This is what makes shadow work sustainable. Not pressure, but pattern. Many people begin shadow work with enthusiasm, but struggle to maintain it when the initial inspiration fades or when life circumstances change. The key to lasting integration isn't unwavering consistency, but understanding the natural cycles of engagement and rest that create sustainable transformation. The timing of your encounter with this material isn't random. Our psyche has a remarkable capacity to seek exactly what it needs at precisely the right moment for integration. This synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence between your inner readiness and external encounters, often guides the shadow integration process more wisely than deliberate planning. Here's a practical framework for maintaining shadow work through the natural cycles of your life. First phase, active engagement, 1 to 3 months. During this period, practice the techniques we've explored regularly. Set aside specific times for exercises like shadow dialogue, projection reclamation, pattern interruption, and identity restructuring. Keep a dedicated journal for insights and observations. Second phase, natural integration, 1 to 2 months. Allow what you've discovered to integrate naturally without forced practice. Notice how the awareness from active work influences your daily life. Often, the most profound shifts happen not during exercises, but in this integration period. Third phase, life application, ongoing. Apply shadow awareness to specific life challenges as they arise. Rather than scheduled practices, use triggering situations, relationships, and decisions as opportunities for shadow work in real-time contexts. Fourth phase, renewed engagement as needed. When you notice patterns reasserting themselves or new shadow material emerging, return to more structured practice. This isn't regression, but spiral development, revisiting similar themes at deeper levels. Shadow integration follows natural cycles, not linear progression. Sustainable practice respects these rhythms rather than forcing consistency. The pressure to maintain perfect consistency often becomes another form of spiritual performance, creating unnecessary guilt when you inevitably move through periods of lesser engagement, reinforcing the very patterns of self-judgment you're working to integrate. Because genuine transformation has its own organic timing that respects the natural cycles of opening, closing, integration, and rest. Your commitment includes honoring the rhythm, not just the practice. The most sustainable approach to shadow work isn't perpetual intensity, but rhythmic engagement that honors both active practice and integrative rest. This prevents shadow work from becoming another performance-based identity that paradoxically reinforces shadow material. For daily implementation, I recommend creating a simple shadow integration journal with these components. Pattern recognition. Page, document recurring patterns, triggers, and projections as you notice them in daily life. Integration practices. Record which techniques you're currently using and their effects. Synchronicity. Notes. Document meaningful coincidences that seem to reflect your inner work, noticing how external circumstances often mirror internal processes. Resistance tracking. Note areas of strongest resistance or avoidance, as these often indicate the most fertile ground for integration. Cycle awareness. Track your natural rhythms of engagement and rest with shadow material, honoring both as essential to the process. For those who want to continue this work with more structured guidance, I've created additional resources focused on specific shadow archetypes in their integration processes. My next video will explore the unique shadow patterns associated with different psychological types, providing personalized integration practices for each. I'm also offering a comprehensive shadow work journal with daily prompts, reflection questions, and structured exercises that build on what we've explored today. To access these resources, subscribe and comment shadow work below. This isn't about mastering shadow. It's about learning to live alongside what you once tried to exile. Every moment of honest contact, every pause before a pattern, every breath held in discomfort, that is the work. The truest measure of progress isn't how much shadow material you've eliminated, but how much of yourself you've learned to include in your field of compassionate awareness. This is the essence of what Carl Jung called individuation, not perfect resolution, but wholeness through relationship. I honor the courage it's taken to engage with this material today, and I look forward to continuing this journey together. To understand more, but to embody what you already understand. The exercises in this video aren't information, they're portals. Each one you completed changed you. Each one you observed strengthened your resistance. Your shadow doesn't fear your seeking, it fears your finding. The end of seeking would mean the beginning of embodiment. The discomfort you feel right now isn't failure, it's success. The shadow becoming conscious initially registers as disturbance, not insight. What will you do differently today? Not eventually, not theoretically, as a result of this video? That question isn't rhetorical, it's the only question that matters. Each moment you hesitate to act on what you know, the shadow adapts. It doesn't disappear, it evolves to survive the insight. Soon, your growth isn't real, it's curated. Your breakthroughs are staged, and your shadow watches, smiling, as you mistake performance for embodiment. The work happens in the gap between watching and living. Cross that gap now, not later. If you made it to this point, you've done more than watch a video. You've stepped toward yourself in a way most people never will. I'm honored to have been a voice in that process, no matter how small. This work is sacred, and if something in it touched you, you're not alone. If you want to keep doing this kind of work with me, if you want more content that doesn't sugarcoat the truth or perform healing, but lives it, support the channel however you can. Subscribe, share it, leave a comment below. Not because I asked you to, but because it helps keep this depth alive in a sea of surface. Let this be your line in the sand, the place where you stop seeking and start embodying, where your shadow stops hiding and starts guiding. You don't need to do this alone. And you don't need to wait. The work doesn't end here, it begins now.